This is America Daily, bringing you the best in truthful news updates and in-depth reports happening now.
It brings tears to my eyes to think that the intelligence that kept our country safe since World War II and has done so much to help us all. I mean, it's widely criticized, but the fact is the CIA used to not sleep at night. They were always active somewhere in the world, and that was to keep the United States as a safer place. And all that has been undermined and essentially destroyed and wiped out.
Welcome to America Daily. I'm Jessica Beatty. Today we welcome back Brad Johnson. He's a retired CIA officer and the founder and president of Americans for Intelligence Reform. Today we discuss the latest whistleblower, President Trump's new pick for National Security Advisor, and what to look out for in the next 2 weeks. Here's my conversation with Brad Johnson. Brad, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's great to be here. It's good to see you again.
According to media reports from last week, an intelligence whistleblower filed a complaint about an inappropriate phone call promise that President Trump made to a world leader. Could you comment on this?
I think the whistleblower case is very interesting, and it's basically an extension, in my opinion, of what we've seen going on for a long time. And the whistleblower laws, the way they're set up, are fairly protective of the person that does the whistleblowing. Now, according to the press, this has all come out basically yesterday and today, so it's still unfolding. So there'll be more data coming out on this fairly quickly. But what the whistleblower did was either overheard or was aware of a phone conversation that the president had apparently related to Ukraine, is what the latest information is. But that remains to be confirmed. That's somewhat speculative. But what that person did then was report it to the appropriate authority in that case, which is the Inspector General for the intelligence community. And that person then has to report it up to the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, which is we have an acting Director of National Intelligence now. And between those two levels is where it bogged down. And the Director of National Intelligence has gone to get additional legal opinions on all of this. So it's being bogged down in a legal sense, but I don't really care about the legal issues per se. My focus is on the intelligence end of things and how that happened. Now, for that person to have done what they did as a whistleblower, there's a lot of protection for them, and we may or may not even ever know who that person was. But I think this is a reflection of exactly what we've seen going on against Trump since he declared his candidacy for president. And it's just been an unending flow of people that are just trying to do him in every way they can. The president, what has been touched on a little bit, but not very much, is that the president of the United States has every right to set foreign policy however he wants. And he also has the 100% full right to declassify information. Now, this is something, as a former chief of station, most people don't realize, it falls within the chief of station authorities to declassify information. So that's something I'm extraordinarily familiar with and something I have personally done many, 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 many times. And I guarantee you, if I, as a chief of station, had the authority to do it, the president of the United States has that times 50 million. So the president of the United States, for whatever reason, for whatever motive, decides to declassify information in a conversation, it's up to him. He's president of the United States. You don't like it, next time vote somebody else in. But he's the president. Same for foreign policy. The president sets foreign policy, not anybody else. He has advisors, but it's his decision. So whatever it was he said, I'm telling you right now, it's not illegal. It doesn't matter. It's his choice as president. So that, therefore, what happens? You have a whistleblower who's sitting in there, who's clearly what people are calling the deep state. This is somebody who's clearly out of that deep state cadre, which I don't particularly like the term. But what it is this large pool of people that reside within the leadership of all of the intelligence community, the IC. And whenever they have an opportunity to basically screw with the president or screw him over in some way, they do. And so that's what we've seen. This is an extension of that. As this unfolds, you're going to see what I'm saying turn out to be exactly right. Now, I'll go on and a little bit as to how that ended up that way, but that's really it in a nutshell. It's the deep state guys looking for an excuse. And they've said this person has now left the government and is out on their own. So if we discover who it is, I can also tell you right now, whoever it is has gone on to be given a good position in some company controlled by liberals somewhere, because he's a party loyalist and is being rewarded for his great work for the party. But now, how did we come to be in this situation? And it's very interesting. I'll go back a little bit, but be very brief. But it really began under, to some degree, well, mainly Jimmy Carter. He was the one that kicked all this off, fired a couple of thousand people on a day that's known as Black Thursday, fired a couple thousand people out of the CIA. The next day, a couple thousand people walked out, said, forget you, and left. This is all under Admiral Turner, was the director of the CIA. And they did it as a RIF, which in government terms means a reduction in force. And it's just they reduced the size of the workforce. Well, say roughly 4,000 people walking out of the CIA in a 2-day period is a devastating blow that was never recovered from. That then later under Bill Clinton was consolidated. Bill Clinton basically made sure that they got rid of all of the people that were essentially conservatives and started moving up all of the people that were liberals. And there was a very large, strong program to promote those people into positions of authority. And that was then finally consolidated. I could go on about this for a long time, but it was finally consolidated under Obama. And so now that leadership methodology, the pipeline to leadership, has been controlled since Clinton days because he implemented that program. And what they do is they don't fire you because you're a conservative and hunt you down and throw you out. What they do is they control jobs. Now, who's promoted is controlled. There are a lot of laws over promotions of people. There are 0 laws over who's assigned what job. And that's where they attack the system. What they have done is they control who gets the better jobs. And if you're not one of them, you do not get the better jobs. In order to get promoted, you need those good jobs because they give you the experience that's required to be promoted. So that's how you see at the FBI all of the people like Peter Strzok, who's clearly a defective individual, get into those positions, and a guy like Jim Comey, who's was recommended for indictment by the IG, and he's not clear of things yet. There's still the FISA investigation going on, and we'll see if he gets indicted out of that. He was a signer on the FISA warrant, which appears to have been both fraudulent and and we'll see which all laws were broken, but it appears to have been a case of fraud, which of course is illegal. So those are how you see that, and that has carried over into the entire IC, which CIA, NSA, FBI, DOJ, all of the players then have been in this pipeline since Clinton days that has been controlled by liberalism. And so you have this state what people call deep state. Now, at the working level, it's different, but at the leadership level, that is the way it works. And I would offer up as absolute confirmation proof of the national intelligence strategy that it's a paper that comes out every 4 years, and it just came out in early 2019. And in that document, one of the major crises that we're supposedly facing, and one of the major intelligence challenges that we're facing, based on the intelligence community, the IC, and they all participate in this paper, is global warming. So in the face of terrorism, Chinese imperialist ambitions to take over the world, all of this other real stuff, we're in fantasy land, worried about global warming. That was what was put into the intelligence community's four-year assessment, was that. So it just shows they've gone over completely to the dark side. They're no longer interested in national security. They're no longer patriots to this country, trying to make sure that we're safe and our children are safe and our grandchildren are safe. They are now more worried about their personal politics than they are the nation's business. So it's a sad turn of events, but that's the way we find ourselves today. And this whistleblower is just one more example of that playing itself out.
On September 9th, CNN reported that the U.S. extracted a Russian spy in 2017. The article claimed that they decided to remove him because they were concerned President Trump and people in his administration mishandled classified intelligence, which would compromise the source's safety. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said that was factually wrong. What's your take on this situation?
Sure. Of course, I need to be relatively cautious on discussing such things, but in essence, I can say this. this is, in my opinion, another case of where the, yeah, like I said, I don't particularly care for the term, but where the deep state is reacting. Basically, you have a large cadre of people that are looking for the president to do anything that gives them a pretext to criticize him. And I believe this is one of those things, because this person had the problems he had after Trump became president. They're able to point the finger at Trump and say it was him. It was something he did. He's leaking information and gave the Russians this or that or the other. The problem with that theory is that this individual was being discussed back in 2014 publicly and 2015 publicly before Trump became president. So again, I think it's ludicrous to suggest that this is somehow all the president's fault or he did it or whatever. It makes no sense in the scheme of things. This was clearly something that is easily verified by Googling back. You can see that the conversation was going on back in the Obama days. So how whatever Obama does suddenly becomes Trump's fault is just, a magical process that no rational human being can understand as they go through. But it's, as I said, they don't care about facts. What they're looking for is a pretext. And the pretext is only concerned with criticizing the president of the United States. So it doesn't matter. Anything that they can possibly criticize, they will use to criticize. And if it's just give a little sliver of the information, it's what they do. It's their methodology. We just saw this once again with the New York Times that was reporting on these attacks on Kavanaugh, Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh, where they're saying, the report came out that has been circulating for a year and nobody reported it. And they came out and said, he sexually assaulted this girl, that, he took out his business and put it in this girl's hand and all this stuff at this party and blah, blah, blah. And it's some guy who's reporting it. But the so-called victim in the case has stated all along that it didn't happen, that she knows nothing about it. So they cut that part out of the story. Why? Because it's that little sliver that they can use to try to criticize. And so they forget all the other facts. In the old days, that used to be called a lie of omission. You're manipulating the information to lie to the people by only telling them a small portion of the truth. Lie of omission isn't a phrase that I hear used very often anymore. So it's, I guess, a bit old fashioned. But that's the type of reporting that you see out of the mainstream media. They don't report the fact that this Russian individual was being discussed in the press in a public fashion before Trump became president. The only part they report is that he got in trouble while Trump was president. So it's the same tactic used. And for those of us who are unfortunately bound by truth, it's a difficult argument to face when they just make up facts. I mean, how do you defend against just lies? And so the only thing we can do is just push out the truth and hope for the best. I think most Americans recognize when they're hearing the truth most of the time. I mean, we can all be lied to, but we can't all be lied to all the time. And that's kind of what we found ourselves in. So I think most people recognize that. And I think, in fact, that's part of the reason why we see President Trump as President Trump, why he was elected. And I think if you did a poll nationwide of every individual that ever watches the news and say, who provides more accurate news or information, the president or the mainstream media, they're all going to go president. He's more reliable than they are. So that's where we find ourselves once again.
I find it really interesting that some people I talk to still believe the Russia collusion hoax. Even with all this information that's coming out, they still believe that President Trump colluded with Russia to win the election.
It is to me as well, and it's something I've actually looked at and thought about for a very long time. And in the CIA business, in espionage, one of the aspects that you always study and get training on and practice and look at is human motivation, because you want to understand human motivation for many, many reasons from the espionage perspective. But it was one of the things I've looked at for a long, long time, wondering why liberals are the way they are. Why do they promote the ideas they promote when there's clearly no basis for them, in fact, to pursue these things? And I finally have concluded. At first, my immediate inclination is, well, they're stupid, but it's just I don't think it's the case. Even though the things they're promoting are stupid, they themselves as individuals are not stupid. And so that I found as a real dilemma, was trying to figure out what it was. And I finally decided, and I don't know if people are familiar with the Myers-Briggs typing test, but initially the there were 16 categories. They've refined it and gone on to have a Myers-Briggs Part 2 or Point 2 or whatever, 1.2. At any rate, they in the Myers-Briggs, it basically categorizes types of people into 16 categories, of which a percentage of those are basically emotion-based people. And that is the common thread. If you look at all of liberalism, socialism, communism worldwide, they're basically one movement, and it's an emotional-based philosophy. And so all of the arguments, if you see, just take, gun control, for example. Gun control is not fact-based. It's a silliness. It's all emotion-based. Save our children. You're trying to murder our children by not having more gun control. It's not. It's a control issue where they want to control the population to mobilize their backers. But more people every year are killed by knives, being beat to death, and a lot of other things than are killed by guns. Many of the people killed by guns are already criminals, a lot of gang-related things, those sorts of activities. So it's already, criminals doing criminal activity, which is already illegal. So creating more laws to somebody who just doesn't care has no impact. So I mean, like I say, that we don't see them trying to make cars illegal. More people die from that than are shot. We don't see them trying to make knives illegal, or baseball bats, or chairs, or fists, or all those other things that kill so many people. So why guns? And the reason is because guns can be created as an emotional issue. And it's the same thing with global warming. It can be created as an emotional issue. Save the planet, do your part, where every person can then participate in their little tiny way and give money to the party and that sort of thing. So it's a way to mobilize people who have a high emotional index. And you'll see that theme worldwide. I've looked at communist parties, and I've lived in socialist countries and seen their system, and it's all an emotion-based thing to keep people drummed up and sort of high on the next crisis that comes. And it's why you hear in the left people say, don't ever let a good crisis go to waste. That is the underlying philosophy, is keep those emotional issues out there, keep your base energized by pumping out these emotional-based issues. So it always has to go through. They always have to do more and more and more and more, which of course is ultimately the downfall of the left here in the United States. I think we've seen the beginning of the end of at least the Democratic Party as we know it now, and the large presidential field, and how radical they've become in these things that they're saying. And it's because they have to appeal to the small base of highly emotional, radical people, because they're the ones that vote in the primary. And so you have to win all those primaries with that base of voters. Then to try and swing back so that you can appeal to normal people is very difficult. So I think that's the ultimate destruction for the Democrats, and why on a nationwide basis they've slowly done worse and worse and worse, because that radical beginning, trying to swing back to the middle, is difficult, and the opponent can start to point out all the stuff they've said before and say, well, now you're saying this, before you said that, which is true. You can't be pinned down because you're lying. One of those is a lie. So nobody knows who you really are, so why should they vote for you? And that type of basic tactic used against them is slowly becoming effective and taking root, and like, as I say, nationwide, taking everything into account, including local state governments, the legislatures, and so on. That you see it playing itself out that way. And that's why Trump does what he does so successfully, making up names for people and calling the press liars, and it's because they lie.
Last Wednesday, President Trump announced his new pick for National Security Advisor, and that's Robert O'Brien. Do you think O'Brien's a good choice for this role?
Well, I don't know Mr. O'Brien personally, so I don't want to insult him greatly or anything. He would not have been my pick. I'll put it that way, and let me say why. The problem with Mr. O'Brien is that he is like so many other people that we see picked to go into these positions of authority. And essentially he's a lawyer, which, and again, not a criticism of lawyers, but it's what they represent and who they are and how they think and how they view the world that, to me, is the issue. And so I think he'll be an okay advisor to the President of the United States. I wouldn't say he's a negative, but I don't think he's what the president needs. And what he's lacking isn't politicians. And essentially, this guy's another politician. He's surrounded by politicians. Everybody up there is a politician for the most part, a few minor exceptions. But what he needs is somebody that's not a politician. What he needed in that position, from my perspective, is an operator, somebody who's actually done all this stuff. That guy can move pieces around the map, and he can say, oh, yeah, we need 10 of these over here. Let's send the fleet this way, all that stuff. But you need somebody who's been underneath it, that's been those boots on the ground on the real earth, on the real planet, who's been moved around by those politicians, so they can look at it and say, oh, no, that's a dumb idea. This is where you need to be. This would be effective. That would not be effective. And an operator, somebody that could look at the president and go, Mr. President, I've done that 3 times. That's not going to work. And, who's really done those things. Now, lawyers never really done any of those things. Not that lawyers don't do things, but they don't have that ground truth capability that an operator could bring to the table. So a military or intelligence or anybody who's been on the ground operating, doing the real life stuff, is who the president needs in that position, and he doesn't have it. And I don't think that's something that's necessarily recognized by the president, because again, he comes from a different background. That background of his is very, very valuable. I'm not belittling that in any way, shape, or form. It's extremely valuable, overall big win for all of us. But everybody has their blind spots because their experience is by definition limited. Nobody knows everything. So this is one of those areas where intelligence, I think, is behind the curtain. National Security Advisor needs to be somebody who is an intelligence professional, and I don't count sitting on the oversight committee is not an intelligence professional. Being on a staff is not an intelligence professional. Those guys are bureaucrats. They're not operators. They're not intelligence professionals. They are intelligence consumers. Now, there's utility to that as well. But reading intelligence reports is great. Well, I've written thousands of intelligence reports. I'm where they come from. This is the operator. Those are the consumers. So that's where the president needs to draw from more and more, not less and less. And basically, everybody that was an operator was cleaned out of the NSC and anyone who's around the president and national security have all been cleaned out. So there aren't any. Well, that's a mistake. Those guys need to be brought back, bring new ones in, start bringing in those sorts of guys that have actual experience, not, sitting in an office discussing what the laws are over it, but the people who've done those things. Those are the guys that the president needs around him, and just doesn't have a single one. So I'm while I'm not, anti Robert O'Brien, I just think he was the wrong choice. He's another typical bureaucrat, lawyer, politician, just not anybody that's really going to do much of anything that's helpful.
Is there anything you're looking out for in the next week or two?
I think the next big thing to come out is probably going to be on McCabe, and he is. There are apparently 3 or 4 instances of what looks like perjury pending for him, and the grand jury has met on his case once, and they didn't finish. Essentially, is what happened. So that all they have to go back to it. I mean. Now, I'm no grand expert in grand juries, so this is speculation on my part, but presumably if they didn't finish, there's a reason. I think in the next week or 2, that will play itself out. And I think that's, once again, part of a larger problem for McCabe, and that McCabe, don't forget, was one of those signers on the FISA warrant that they used to spy on the Trump campaign. Well, so he's already lied to Congress, so there's already criminal activity there. His lawyers have gone to the Department of Justice multiple times saying, okay, what's the deal? I'll do community time, pay $10,000 fine, and whatever it is you say, let's settle. And they're going, no, we're not settling, no. Why would DOJ, who, again, lawyers, what do they normally do? They normally plea bargain this stuff out in advance, and they're not doing it. Why? And that's a question not brought to the surface by anybody. And that is the key central issue here. Why are they not settling? And that's because there's some other thing coming. There's another part to that. Well, what could it be? FISA. It's the FISA. And so McCabe is probably going to go to trial, get convicted of this stuff, and then they're going to go after him on FISA. And then now FISA, if all of this stuff is true, and it remains to be seen, but so far, we don't know for a fact the motives. We all know it's probably political, but we don't know for a fact. It hasn't been proven. but it looks an awful lot like this group of people tried to overthrow a legally elected president of the United States, which certainly comes near a threshold that I would call treason. And I'll also remind everybody that right the day after the Mueller report was issued, our AG Barr, U.S. Attorney General Barr, reactivated the death penalty for federal law, under federal law. So treason is something that can be punished by the death penalty. I do not think that was an accident either. So here, if you get a guy, and just play this scenario out, you get this guy McCabe, he apparently was kind of a secondary player in this whole thing, but guilty, involved, probably, or it appears. And allegedly, that's the word I need. And so if he gets convicted of these 3 or 4 crimes, he's looking at jail time. He then goes into the FISA case then as a convicted criminal. Now, who's the perfect guy to then go to for Attorney General Barr and say, Mr. McCabe, now we're bringing you up on this. It appears that you were part of a plot to overthrow the legally elected president of the United States, which is treason. You're already going to jail. We're going to bring you up on charge of treason. Death penalty's on the table. Now, would you like to negotiate a deal? And, I think McCabe, after he soils himself, will immediately tell them anything and everything they want to know. So I personally think that's what we're seeing the beginning stages of. There, like I said, there's 2 or 3 factors here that lead me to conclude that that's the way headed forward. And that's the logical conclusion, that they're setting him up to flip. And you want those convictions first in a case like this, because you want him convicted now so that you can flip him in the FISA case. So because he was a signer for the FISA warrant request to the judge, and lying to judges at a federal level, is illegal. So and it looks like that everyone who signed those things broke a law. And if every one of them broke a law, then you got to start looking back at that thing I was talking about initially, which was motive. And what is the motive? Since the president didn't break any laws, what was your motive for doing it? And our AG Barr, our Attorney General Barr, has said publicly multiple times that he asked precisely that question. Well, no laws were broken, so why did you instigate this investigation? What was going on? And he says he gets inconsistent answers and answers that don't make any sense. So therefore, we start digging down, and that again, what does a prosecutor do? He gets his investigators out on the case, and they start digging in. Now that apparently is going to come up in a big way under State's Attorney General John Durham, and so he's a prosecutor. He's working on the case, and I'll remind everybody that maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago, he rented out additional office space so that he had room for more lawyers to come in, and he extended his lease. So why would a guy do that? Now, okay, we would look at that as a small piece of operational intel. And what does it tell you? It tells you he's expanding. He's not shutting down. He's expanding. Why would you expand? It's because every time he scratches the earth, he's finding more information, digging down. So I see a lot of indicators that this is going to be big and messy and bloody, not literally, of course, but I see a lot of indicators of that, but no indicators that this is just going to go away poof into the night and nothing happens. So we'll see, but there's my 2 bits.
Well, Brad, thanks so much for being on the show.
Okay, good. It was a pleasure.
If you have any questions for Brad, you can let us know on our Facebook page at AD Top Story of the Day. Once again, I'm Jessica Beatty. Thanks for listening to America Daily. Until next time.
This is America Daily, bringing you the best in truthful news updates and in-depth reports happening now.